I watched 4 videos about how race plays out in our schools. The 4 videos were Ending School Segregation, Segregated by Design, Where Did All the Integrated Schools Go and Why, and The Color of Law. I grew up in Garnet Valley, PA, and I have lived here all my life. Garnet Valley is primarily a white community. I can say so myself that my school was very good at being equal to everyone and never choosing sides or disincluding anyone depending on their color or race. The first video I watched was Ending School Segregation. This video started off by talking about how an African American girl named Linda Brown had to walk to a bus through busy roads and streets that would take them across town to school. There was a different school 4 blocks away from their home that they would have gone to, but it was for white children only. The little girl was from Topeka, Kansas. In 1950 in Kansas, schools were segregated by skin color. By the time I was born, life was different than it was for this little girl and many other families. Schools were not segregated or even allowed to be. Life was very different back then than it is now. It hurts me to see people had to grow up this way just because of their skin color. They thought it was okay as long as both schools were equal. African American schools didn't get the same education as white schools did. Watching this video made me very angry and upset that African Americans had to go through these types of things. The NAACP tried to turn down the president and let African Americans and white children in the same schools, but it did not happen. Life would have been very different in today's world if this had never happened in the past. If they had never segregated schools along with many other things, no one would see a difference in a person's color. The second video I watched was Segregated by Design. This video talked about segregation in other ways than in school. African Americans were separated and kept away from the white houses. They kept African Americans away from downtown businesses or anything near the white communities. When white middle-class families moved into the suburbs, they could buy property with no down payment if they were veterans. But African American families had to put a substantial down payment to be able to live there. They were also not able to get mortgages because the federal government would not insure them. It is not fair for them to have to pay off their whole house at once in places that were not nearly as nice as white homes, but they both paid the same and white people were able to get mortgages. African American families also had to buy their home on a contract, and if they ever missed one single payment, they could be evicted from their homes. They weren't even given the opportunity to participate in the city's white housing market. Each person should have been given the same opportunities as everyone else no matter what, because it is very unfair. The third video I watched was Where Did All the Integrated Schools Go and Why? This video went back into school segregation. It talked about how even though the schools were segregated, they thought it was okay as long as they were equal. But there was always one school that had the upper hand in the end. They were not equal, so they did not get the same education as the others. No matter their race, everyone needs school in the end, and to push the African Americans back in their schooling just because their color was very unfair. They came up with the idea of charter schools, which are privately owned schools. They thought that coming up with the private schools, it would mean that the owner of the school would be able to have a choice and let African American and white children in the same schools. The parents could choose if they wanted their children to go to a diverse school or a segregated school, but they ended up declining the idea. Schools are now starting to slip back into segregation more than they were in the 1960s. This is something sad to hear considering all the work everyone has put into to make sure everyone is equal and no one was segregated by their color anymore. The last video I watched was The Color of Law. This video talked about what happened after the Great Depression. After the Great Depression, they started public housing. The public houses began for the white middle-class families that were homeless or lost their homes during the Depression. There were some public houses that were built for the African Americans, but there were only a few, and others were for whites only. After this, the Supreme ruled that there were to be no more racial zones. This means that they can't have places just for African Americans and just for whites, and they can live wherever, no matter the place. The Supreme Court had said that their job is to protect property rights. All schools and places should be diverse, and it shouldn't matter the area or town you live in. No one should be limited.